All right. So we're very lucky to be joined by Erik here. Erik is the self-proclaimed crazy Bitcoiner, which in a room full of crazy people is like quite an accolade.
Thank you.
So Erik wrote a book called Crypto Sovereignty. It's probably the only time that word will be muttered on stage today. So why don't we start with why did you choose to call it Crypto Sovereignty?
Yeah, so it's not about the sovereignty that crypto, as we all know that it is, but it's truly about the actual sovereignty that cryptography offers, and Bitcoin utilizes that praxis of cryptography through creating a new monetary system that can't be debased. People can't make new units of it. They can't screw with any part of it because we actually are using cryptography in its most core and efficient way. And so I decided to call it crypto sovereignty to me, once you actually understand the actual praxis of how cryptography operates, that's where true self-sovereignty comes from. And that's the same difference of why we encourage people to take self-custody of their own Bitcoin versus leave it on exchange, because exchange Bitcoin is not you being self-sovereign and you're not using cryptography in any meaningful way. Whereas when you're actually securing your Bitcoin directly, utilizing the base level cryptography, you can store those 12 words in your head, and that can actually let you be sovereign, but it's only through understanding how that form of knowledge actually works.
All right, so we were out last night. You're a little bit hungover.
Yes, I'm still a bit hungover, so pardon me if my cadence is a little off.
We'll get the energy going. But so we were talking a little bit about how Bitcoin and Bitcoiners are kind of like anti-nihilists. There's a lot of optimism, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. But we're an unusual bunch, and the things that we kind of push are things like save for the future, eat healthily, have a farm,
have babies,
and as like our friend American Hodl says, this is it's kind of the advice that your grandma gave you. And then there's these weird cypherpunks that are giving the same advice to people. So why do you think Bitcoin is so sort of restorative in that way?
Well, I think what's really ended up happening is that through the blackness and the nihilism that we all seem to see that's so endemic to the world, things can seem truly hopeless. It can seem like there is no possibility of extricating ourselves from all of the evil and wickedness that seems to be going on through the world. And what Bitcoiners seem to have really discovered is that vis-a-vis Bitcoin and the radical form of truth that it actually exposes us to, that starts to augment and change us in a really meaningful way, which returns us to older values, very similar to what our grandmother would tell us. And through this shifting and the realignment of our value set towards real radical truth, we actually find that it is something of great meaning in this world that we can actually use to augment and change the world that we live within. And I think it's extremely important that people realize, like, all of the darkness and the black and the nihilism, it's extremely true. And that's why Bitcoin is so important, is, as my friend Nico likes to say, the options are Bitcoin or slavery. And to be very clear, like, central bank digital currencies are coming after they've destroyed the dollar, whether it's the Aussie dollar, the American dollar, or whatever fiat currency. There's a very clear plan and agenda right now that we will go into a hyperinflationary world. Your savings will be destroyed. And once they do that, they will implement a total financial surveillance panopticon called central bank digital currencies, where if you buy too much meat or too much gas or whatever, they will cut you off. And the question is will you go into that prison that they have designed for you, or will you actively resist and say, no, my money belongs to me, you are not allowed to have that power over me, and I choose this new system over your old system?
So that kind of hints at like this push to localism that, again, a lot of Bitcoiners talk about. Do you think that's more of like a social movement towards localism, or is there an economic reason for it as well?
There's a huge economic reason for it. And it turns out that with localism and building circular economies, that's going to keep your wealth localized. It's going to create for greater amounts of exchange happening in your community. Your government's going to be less capable of exploiting you with endemic taxation at every single turn. And there becomes a real opportunity to actually build a self-sovereign economic unit locally amongst all of your friends and peers. And one of the things that I've found the most fascinating in the last year for me is that the people that seem to grok Bitcoin the quickest and latch onto it first are farmers and people that are involved in regenerative agriculture, because they understand the value proposition that it is, in addition to seeing the absolute terrorism that's going on in places like Holland, where the government is actively seizing farmers' farms in order to implement a global agenda that is against farmers under the purview that this is for sustainability. Like, it's absolutely insane. And even though these people are actively, legally resisting their government's still seizing their farms. And they finally got into the place where they said, the only way that we will actually be able to meaningfully fight back is if we have self-sovereignty over our wealth, and the only way we can have self-sovereignty over our wealth is with Bitcoin. So I think we're just at the very beginning of this movement, and as it starts building, it's going to become more and more powerful. We're going to see localized economies offering discounts of 2 to 5% for people choosing to pay with Bitcoin. And the thing I'm the most excited about that I'm starting to see is people are actually charging 2 to 5% more when people are choosing to use credit card transactions, because that's how much banks steal from them on every single transaction. And it's wrong, frankly. And to me, like, this is the biggest thing that Bitcoin actually implements for us, is that this is an ethical argument. No one should be allowed to steal from you, period. We've all learned that since we were children, and yet for some reason as an adults, we tolerate institutions and governments stealing from us over and over and repeatedly, so much so that it's become normalized, and we think that these bastards are allowed to steal from us when it's not. It's theft. And so I really encourage anybody, take Bitcoin to your local community, educate people about it and why it can help them and how it's going to save them from this digital panopticon that is coming. I want to be very clear about that. It is coming, and if you do not resist, you will find yourself in a position that you cannot escape from.
So I definitely want to touch on the wealth thing. So in the book, you talk about Bitcoin as having a kind of maybe a new definition of what wealth actually is, and how wealth is going to move towards truth. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd point out that what we actually call the state is commonly known as a commonwealth. It is literally a compounded word of the commonality of wealth. It's how we choose to share our wealth together, and that is actually what creates the laws, the substrate that is the commonality of wealth. And with Bitcoin, there is this totally new perspective of, instead of me being an American, that I need to hold my wealth in conjunction with all other Americans and the American government, which is committing not only war crimes daily, but it is actively creating genocides in several countries around the world. And that's something I want to have nothing to do with. To me, that doesn't represent any form of wealth or prosperity for anyone. And so with Bitcoin, there is now a new global social movement to have solidarity with people everywhere utilizing our wealth. So when I choose to hold my wealth in Bitcoin, I'm doing that in solidarity with people from all around the globe, whether it is Uyghur people trying to escape from China, people fleeing from either side of the conflict that's going on in Ukraine, or individuals that are just being suppressed by their government because they're journalists and want to speak to freedom. The real wealth that we share together is when we realize that no one should be able to steal from anybody else for any reason, period. And by us making that ethical decision to participate in a new economic system where stealing cannot be part of how the system fundamentally functions, we actually allow for a totally new world to be created that, in my opinion, is magnitudes more wealthy and will generate more wealth for all people everywhere into the future in a very meaningful way, so that we're no longer financing these endless wars, endemic taxations, and idiotic government projects that none of us can afford at this point in time.
So, here. So a lot of your writing, and I think possibly like one of the big reasons that Bitcoin clicked for you, is the fact that it stops funding these forever wars. Why was that such a early sort of penny drop moment for you?
Well, so for me, first and foremost, I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in the state in any meaningful way. I think we need to burn it down. And it's not because, yeah, fuck the state.
Let's go.
Well, and I want to be very clear. This isn't just because I want to burn it down and have it be willy-nilly chaos everywhere. That is not what anarchism is. Anarchism is about voluntary, consensual organization of people along the lines that they choose to do for themselves. I believe that we are an intelligent, sovereign, loving, caring community of people that want to help each other and don't want to institute violence against one another. So why the fuck are we still participating in a monetary system that allows for that? And so as an anarchist, I got involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement. I was very motivated about the message that they had, but I found when it actually came to putting the praxis into motion, there was no tenable solution at the point in time. So I kind of fell into a crushing depression, and I was like, how can we ever actually deal with this idea of endemic war? Because one of the things that really affected me when I was younger is I traveled through Cambodia, and if you've ever been there, you will be chased around by groups of children who are missing their limbs because they were blown off by American munitions. I was so horrified and disgusted to learn that I had a direct personal relationship with how these children not only lost their parents and their family, but their limbs as well. And to me, I had to do everything in my power to stop that. And when I figured out that Bitcoin was truly a self-sovereign money that the government couldn't steal or take from people on their own accords, it really clicked for me to go, wow, if we can create a global social movement to use Bitcoin to resist fiat money, there is a real hope that we can end the infinite wars that the US government and its imperialism has instituted all around the globe. And as an American, I feel that I have an ethical and a moral claim to demand that that stops, because not only is it illegal and unconstitutional, more importantly, it is absolutely unethical and immoral, and it is disgusting that anybody would support it and would actively be involved with it. And so to me, the entire reason that I use Bitcoin is because I want to stop the military-industrial complex and its endless wars and infinite genocide that it wants to do to keep everyone under its heel.
I told you we were lucky to have Erik here. So I definitely want to come back to the isms. We're going to get into that.
Oh, no.
But let's go back a step. So so we talk a lot about Bitcoin being a separation of money and state, but how does cryptography actually play into that? And how does it bring power back to the people as opposed to the state?
Well, so first and foremost, cryptography, it wasn't just like a fun math problem that people were like, hey, check this out. This is a fun way that we can communicate without people spying. No, this is a technology of war. It is fundamentally designed so that if someone is trying to kill you and you're trying to communicate with somebody else, you can have a specific advantage in the theater of war against them because you have secured communication that can allow for you to organize yourself in a meaningful way. And to be clear, our states and governments are waging an active civil war against us and our ability to hold wealth independently outside and against them. They want to make sure that you always pay your taxes, that every bill is paid on time, and that you pay the amount that is owed, if not more. By us choosing to use Bitcoin, and this is the kind of the more latter step that hasn't happened, that perhaps it will in the future, people can actually start actively participating in tax resistance movements. And I actually think that that's going to be one of the big steps that's going to come in the next few years, is that people are going to collectivize themselves and say, you know what? I'm not going to pay my United States federal taxes anymore because these people use it to wage unconstitutional and illegal wars across the globe that were not approved by Congress, were not approved by the people, and weren't voted on in any meaningful way. So we're going to actually reinstitute and reclaim our democratic rights by forcing the economic function onto them and using cryptography to protect our wealth, because it doesn't matter how powerful the US military is, you cannot guess my 12 words randomly. It is impossible. And once they figure that out, they're going to have to actually start negotiating with us in a meaningful way to figure out how do we start building a consensual society together. So to me, what cryptography really represents is this praxis of war playing out on an individual level against an institution that wants to enslave us.
So someone I respect really deeply in this space, Alan Farrington, writes, so he talks about the current fiat system being like a system where both money buys you power and power can grant you money. And under a Bitcoin standard, that flips on its head. I think the fact that money can buy you power is probably a forever thing, but no longer can power actually grant you money, which I think is really, really important. But you obviously talk about this fight. Is this a fight that we're winning, or is this the fight that we've already won?
Just look around. We're winning incredibly every single day. More Bitcoiners join our system. More people convert their fiat into Bitcoin. More people grok what the mission is actually about. And as this is happening, the darkness and the nihilism of the fiat system pronounces itself more and more and more. And you see that every day when you go into the grocery store and the prices of eggs goes up a little bit more. The price of milk goes up a little bit more. Gas becomes more unaffordable. People can't pay their rent. If you just open any social media app right now, you will find videos of young people bemoaning that they can't get by in any meaningful way, that the dream of being able to own a home is completely outside of their ability and purview to capture it. And so the most powerful thing that we have working for us is that nihilism. People see how fucked up things are and they want a solution, but they don't know it and they don't see it. And that's where it comes down to each and every one of you. You're actually here because you understand Bitcoin in a meaningful way. It is your responsibility to go to your family, your friends, your community, your grocer, who you buy your meat from, and tell them Bitcoin is the way that you can actually help and protect your family and your loved ones against all of this endemic inflation that we have no control over. And it's extremely important that we actually take this mission seriously, because each of us in our community can actually be that pillar of support and strength that educates other people and really helps onboard them in a meaningful way. So that, and the other one that's pretty important is that a lot of people can get lost in the shitcoining and the crypto garbage. And it's so important that, you know, if they go through that cycle, they'll come back to Bitcoin eventually, but you can really save them from the 4 or 5 years that they're going to waste trying to chase down fiat gains, when they'll eventually realize that Bitcoin is the core asset that they need to be collecting.
So I just want to dig into that a little bit deeper. You talk a lot about what is actually at stake in this war, and I think it is a war. Talk a little bit about what happens if we lose, and sort of the global panopticon that possibly we live in now, but maybe is certain in the future if we don't win this.
Yeah, our children will actually not have any concept of what privacy itself means. They will literally not have any spaces that exist that aren't under constant surveillance all the time, forever, without them being able to know or understand if they're being surveilled. And it's extremely important to understand that once you start spying on somebody and watching them all the time, that modifies people's behavior and their ability to actually actively resist. And so if Bitcoin doesn't win, as Nico says, it is slavery. And when I say slavery, it doesn't have to be us in bondage of actual chains, but it can just be constant, ongoing surveillance forever. And then when you add the layer in of the economic surveillance, there becomes no tenable way at all for people to actively or meaningfully resist, in addition to the fact that this becomes like living inside of a concentration camp. You trying to leave and escape at that point in time is going to be magnitudes harder than it is to not actually go in there in the first place. And so I really encourage you that whether it's in 2 years or in 5 years, when they implement central bank digital currencies and they give you your free $500 for signing up, know that it's a fucking trap. That is how they're going to get you to participate in that system, so that then one day when you go and buy a little too much meat at the store, it's not going to work. And then you're going to find that your bank account is empty because they're going to just steal that money directly from you and say, well, you violated whatever our environmental social standards were for this, so you don't get to have your money anymore. Again, this is coming. It's not a maybe, it's a when. And so when it does show up, we all need to be prepared to actually work with our communities and fight back in a meaningful way, because like this isn't democratic. Like this isn't legal, it's not government. This is something else, and it's very wicked and evil, because once this agenda gets implemented, they can do whatever the hell they want to any of us. And if you think back to what COVID produced and introduced, however you felt about it, you should see and understand that when the government can implement an emergency, they can start really doing whatever they want across the board. And so when hyperinflation does come, that same style of emergency will be implemented so that they can violate the laws that are supposed to restrain them in a meaningful way.
So you touched on something there that I think is really valid. I think what will happen when CBDCs get implemented is they will offer a sort of stimulus check to the population, whatever that is, and people are going to opt into that, whether we like it or not. And maybe this is the nihilist in me, but I think a large portion of the population will end up going down the central bank digital currency route. So how do you think we spread Bitcoin further, and how many people do you think Bitcoin can actually save?
I mean, I think it's under 5%, if not less than that. And that's mostly just, if everybody could actually understand Bitcoin and meet us where we were at and really ask sincere questions, that number could be way higher. But most people are so deeply lulled asleep and have been taught to believe that thinking is actually this authoritarian process of taking something that you've been told is true and plugging it in versus actually doing the rigorous process of applying logic and reason in a rigorous, thoughtful chain that allows for them to come to their own conclusions. So most people can't think in a meaningful way. So when they get their $500 free, they just think it's $500 free, which, hey, if somebody's giving out free money, why shouldn't you take it? Well, because it's cheese in a mousetrap and it's designed to snap around your neck and then keep you there forever. So you should be very thoughtful about what you do when they do offer that, because it is a dangerous trap. And I think that while most people are going to do that and most people will get stuck in that, what's going to happen is that we're actually now the people that live outside of the concentration camp and have a meaningful way to help other people. And so your job is going to be cutting a hole in the fence and signaling people that, hey, you can get out here now. I can help you do that, but you have to make the decision to actually run for the hole. I can't do that for yourself. And I think that this is actually the most important part of getting people onto a Bitcoin standard, is understanding that, like, it takes courage. It takes conviction to know what we're doing is actually right and that this is going to work out. And so we have to encourage other people that even though it can be scary, even though it can seem dangerous or risky, that the real risk is staying in the current system that is going to choke the noose much tighter on them. And we need to be prepared for when that happens.
All right, well, I'm just conscious of time, so let's get into anarchy.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people misconstrue what anarchism actually is, and that word is a bit of a voodoo word. So do you want to, what is anarchism to you?
Well, so first of all, a little historic background. The word anarchism actually came up after President Garfield was assassinated by an anarchist who was known at this point in time as a libertarian socialist, who just walked up to him at the World's Fair and shot him in the chest. And so at that point, the label of anarchism came up as a pejorative to say that these are people who want no rules and chaos. The background of anarchism actually comes from the socialism movement. That, to be clear, socialism was a movement that had started in the 1800s before Karl Marx, and Marxism then appropriated the entirety of the socialist movement for itself. But all the way up until the declaration of the Communist Manifesto, anarchism and communism were a single movement that worked in tandem and together. After the Communist Manifesto, where Marx said that we needed to seize the state and create a dictatorship of the proletariat, the leader of the anarchist contingency, Bakunin, went to Marx and he was like, "What the fuck is this bullshit? You want us to hijack the state and then use parliamentary processes to actually try to implement a communist agenda? Like, what kind of fucking nonsense is this? Go fuck yourself." Anarchists have nothing to do with this now, and that's when the split between anarchism and communism happened. The big problem that anarchism had is that because it didn't want to use the state to force people into a methodology of creating socialism together, they had no meaningful praxis to organize, and so it fell into disrepair all the way up until the 21st century, when we had a mysterious man show up named Satoshi Nakamoto, who presented a way for people to be able to voluntarily and consensually participate in a new monetary system that could ensure that violence wasn't a direct result and part of it. So now, what I believe is that there's a renewed opportunity for anarchism to actually lead as a global, and I'm going to say this, socialist movement, because that's what it is, because the objective of anarchism, very much like the objective of communism, is to create a stateless society. The difference is that anarchism knows that using the state is a siren's call that will result, as the 20th century did, in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people under the auspicions that we can create wealth out of nothing. It's just not true. What we can do is we can create a stateless society by voluntarily and consensually working together and actually using radical new forms of democratic processes, using the internet and the praxis of cryptography to create these new political systems. And so what I see happening in the future is that we are going to get this new form of a political system that's built on the internet, that utilizes cryptography and utilizes radical forms of liquid democracy in order to create and build this new social network.
Okay, so I've heard you talk a lot about this and sort of the breakdown of law that we're seeing in society today. Do you want to explain that and why you think that we are actually beginning to see a breakdown in law?
Yeah, I mean, we had a man in the United States named Jeffrey Epstein who facilitated large-scale child raping for the political and wealthy class. And he was suicided, and to this day, there's been no research about it. President Bush lied to us about the war in Iraq and WMDs, and more than 1 million people died from that. And today he is on his ranch painting nice pictures that he's selling to other people. We haven't had law for a very long time. We've believed the absolute asinine bullshit that we have law, because if you violate the law, you will go to jail. But if you conduct genocide and steal billions of dollars from other people, you get a Presidential Medal of Freedom. This is fucking nonsense, and it needs to stop. And we need to stop participating in it and actually speaking to it. Because what these people are doing is fucking evil. And the thing that makes it evil isn't because they're maniacal, wicked, hateful people. It's that they're fucking stupid. They can't think hard enough about what's going on and what they're participating in. And very much like Hannah Arendt told us in The Banality of Evil, the confrontation of evil isn't about presencing them to what the issue is. It's about what we do in response to it when we confront it. And so I highly encourage you that if you think that law still exists in a meaningful way, and that if we can vote ourselves out of this, ask ourselves, how is it possible that that much money was created over the last 5 years to finance all kinds of bullshit that none of us voted on or had any say in? I'm very sorry if this is a dark moment for you, but the law hasn't existed in a long time. The only possibility that we have of actually getting law back is by claiming the self-sovereignty that we have for ourselves, and Bitcoin is the most powerful tool that we have in being able to get that self-sovereignty.
So I'm going to stitch you up a little bit here. Last night, after a few beers, you said a very
like 10 beers.
You said a very controversial thing that I think is going to trigger a lot of people here today. But I think there's some validity in it. And again, you've been talking a lot about the different isms and how a lot of them are misunderstood. But you said to me that you think Bitcoin is communism. You're going to have to explain that for us.
Yeah, so back to what I was saying about anarchism being a movement to create a stateless society, that is communism. And furthermore, this word is highly inflammatory because of the way that Leninists, Trotskyists, Maoists, and other people appropriated the word communism, and all the way back to how Marx appropriated the word communism so that anarchism was never a part of it. If you actually see the way that we're collectivizing our wealth together, the fact that my 1 Bitcoin is worth the same as your 1 Bitcoin, and that we have no say or control over the ability to take one another's Bitcoin from one another, and that the laws of our system equally apply to each of us, like, I'm sorry, but that is a very communistic notion. And again, it's a highly inflammatory term, and it's for the very real reason of the propaganda that's been used by the Leninists, by the Marxists, by the Maoists, by all of the prior people that have appropriated the ideas of communism for themselves and created a malformed, mutilated idea of it, which in my opinion, Marxism was the first mutilation of the socialist ideals in order to allow for him to fit it into his framework. And so the book that I'm kind of working on, which will probably be out in a decade because I can't actually get through any of it, is going through all of the etymological and philosophical background of these terms like communism, socialism, anarchism, fascism, and everything in between to sort of unpack all of it and actually really understand what these words mean and how they've been twisted and contorted in a very meaningful way to rob us of knowing and understanding what it is. I mean, I think most of us have had people throw around terms of fascism or of somebody calling you one a fascist or somebody calling somebody a communist, when really all they're saying that there is an authoritarianist. And so to me, what Bitcoin really represents is it is a communist movement, but it is communism through anarchism and technology in order to ensure that it is a totally voluntary, non-violent, this is the most important part, non-violent movement. Because that's the key difference between anarchism and communism, is that communism wants to utilize violence in order to implement its stateless society, whereas anarchism knows and understands that the only way that you can implement a stateless society is through voluntarily consensual agreements.
So we're really running out of time. We've got about 30 seconds left. I think everyone in this room is taking Bitcoin very seriously, but do you think as a whole we are taking this seriously enough? Are we taking this fight to the people?
No, none of us are taking it seriously enough, because when you zoom out more and more and more, In my opinion, Bitcoin is unequivocally the most important movement that is going on in humanity today, because this is the point of where everything can change. We can either go into total digital panopticon slave culture, or we can break that and liberate ourselves for a new and unknown future that, while it is scary, it provides the infinite opportunity of what the potentiality of humanity means when we can get these monkeys off of our backs who are constantly stealing money from us and our productivity. And more importantly than just stealing that productivity from us, it steals our actual spiritual agency to know that we are beings of light and love who want to care and help one another, and that it is through that process together that we can make a much more profound and incredible world. But that only starts once we start respecting and venerating the other as being a true human being who deserves to have the agency and the power of self-sovereignty, not just of their wealth, but of their community, of their society, and most importantly, their actual soul.
All right, we could go for ages. We got to go. But everyone buy Crypto Sovereignty. Buy a dictionary as well, because you'll need it. But let's have it for Erik.
Thank you very much.